Funk Unplugged is a classic collectathon-style action platformer game from a new indie studio named Vamped Games, and it follows an adorable amp mascot named Ampy, obviously, as he tries to bring music back to his world after an evil race of hat monsters swoop in and break all the records and play annoying static on all the radios. I'm fairly certain it started out as a video game adaptation of Footloose, but they couldn't get the rights to Kevin Bacon's likeness, so this was the next best thing. All joking aside though, this game is a lot of fun and oozes charm. The soundtrack is definitely worth noting first, as they put a lot of detail into not only making the game feel funky as you play it, but also in making the music part of the gameplay. Ampy's main ability is the power to transform the world around him using his magical antenna, which sounds kinda dirty for some reason, to bring dead things back to life, fix broken structures, and more. Every time you press the button to transform an object, though, the music kicks into high gear with some extra funk, which really just motivates the player to rejuvenate the world so that you can hear more of those sick, funky beats in all their glory. This mix of music and gameplay helps the game stand out from your average 3D platformer. Aside from that, the gameplay is admittedly simple, but in a satisfying and polished way that just harkened back to the classic platformers, rather than feeling half-baked and unfinished. Ampy can also double jump, crouch jump for extra height, and get a good running leap for those harder to reach platforms, as well as fling his funky fists at enemies to knock them down an octave. Ampy also learns new moves throughout the game thanks to the Move Master, who doles out new abilities after Ampy has collected enough golden records inside each world, which gives more incentive to explore since you can't reach the later worlds without these new abilities. There's a lot of reasons to fully explore these beautifully realized levels though, as collectibles are scattered all over each world, which is made up of 3 levels and a boss, and while some of the more obvious ones just exist to guide Ampy's path through the level, others are surprisingly well hidden in areas you wouldn't think to look, and there's a good variety of things to track down as well. Aside from the normal amps and records required to progress further, there's also optional hats and skins to find in each level that are just fun to customize Ampy with. There's everything from just palette swaps and baseball caps, to ridiculous patterns and ridiculous accessories. You can even make Ampy rock out as a certain copyrighted hero that shall not be named here, but obviously was my go-to for much of the game. I would also be remiss to not mention the cool creator hats in the game, including one they designed for me back during the early alpha days. Sure, it looks pretty goofy, and I wouldn't blame you for not wanting to run around as a cat box, but I genuinely love it, and I'm honored to have my own little piece of content in the game. But hey, if you want to sport something a little different without covering up your cool custom paint job, might I suggest a villainous accessory modeled after the one and only flaming monocle? Yeah, I gotta admit, that one's pretty awesome. Anyway, that's enough about the fun customization options, because the rest of the game is great too. Like I said, there's currently 4 unique worlds in the game, with each one made up of 3 levels and a boss battle. There's a good variety to the gameplay structure in each level, as some are straightforward platformers from point A to point B, whereas others add in side-scrolling sections, for example, or even more of an open-world atmosphere where you're just tasked with collecting all the MacGuffins to get past a progression barricade, such as tracking down keys to open a locked door. Each level aesthetically feels surprisingly unique as well, for the first game from an indie studio where they could easily have just reused a bunch of the same assets and just switched up the level design. The ice world is an especially good example of this. The first level is your basic ice level, but with some cool Viking touches that give it some nice visual flair. But the second level is actually a frozen underground mine that feels like it has a rich history the game just barely touches on. And the third level switches it up again to feature a holiday-themed town that almost looks ripped right out of The Nightmare Before Christmas, where you're doing missions for different villagers in order to receive Christmas presents for a greedy gatekeeper. The amount of visual detail put into this game is very impressive, and really shows how much passion the developers have to get this game just right and make it memorable for people. It might have the same kind of bright, colorful art style that a lot of other platformer games in Unity have, but it does enough to distinguish itself in the details to get a leg up above the competition. The game isn't without its flaws, though. The platforming feels a little floaty, which you get used to and really just feels like a design choice, but some of the polygonal edges of different platforms can cause annoying collision issues that make certain platforming sections less fun and more trial and error. This is combined with the fact that there's really no stakes to death in the game, as there's no lives or score to the game. And while that's a nice bonus to any section where the platforming might not be your friend, it also pretty much takes away all the difficulty from the game, as missing a jump or getting killed by an enemy is just a minor inconvenience that spawns you a little ways back, but still with everything you've collected. It makes the game more accessible to people of all ages, which can be good for a more casual experience, or parents wanting to introduce their children to this style of game, but it would be nice if there was at least some difficulty options for those looking for more of a challenge. The gameplay itself is pretty easy too, as enemies are fairly spread out, dangerous traps few and far between, and most difficult platforming sections optional for only if you want to grab the aforementioned hidden collectibles. But it does give something more substantial for the hardcore completionists that need to scour every inch of the game for all the records, hats, and skins the game has to offer. In a lot of ways, the game feels like something akin to modern Mario games, where the levels themselves are pretty straightforward and easy to complete, but going back and trying to find everything in each level is where the real challenge and reward comes from. And while it would be nice to have a bit more to grasp onto in the game itself, it's most definitely a compliment to compare this humble indie title to such a gaming titan from Nintendo. I did also run into a moderate amount of bugs and graphical glitches, but I don't say this to knock the game in any way, since I had it before launch and they warned me ahead of time they were still working on it. I just say it as a PSA in case you see anything weird in this footage, as every issue I sent to them they had fixed almost immediately. They really care about making this game the best it can be, and that shows in the final product. Some of you probably think I'm being overly kind to this game because I've been following it for so long and clearly have a connection to the developers, but that's not true. I followed it for so long because I've been a huge fan of the project since it first started on Kickstarter, and I'm just really excited that the final project has turned out so well. I would have been super bummed if they finally released it and it sucked. Trust me. But they didn't disappoint, so I want to help get the word out with a fair review worthy of their talent. The game isn't perfect, and it's easier and simpler than most other modern platformers, but it also harkens back to a simpler time in gaming, and there's nothing wrong with that as a style choice. It just won't be for everyone, as some modern gamers need things more fast-paced and explosive. Overall though, I think this game nails exactly what it wanted to be, and any fan of classic collectathon style games would not be disappointed in the bang for their buck with this musical little gem. I give it 4 out of 5 stars.